Great, we're live.
Wonderful. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Haley Boning. I'm here with Barry Chandler, and we together are the co-founders of Storyforge. Welcome to Storyforge Live. This is our twice weekly live streamed office hours. So twice a week on Wednesdays and Fridays at 11 a.m. Eastern and 8 a.m. Pacific. We're joining you live for our office hours. Barry from the West Coast and me from the Midwest. So we've spent, Barry and I, the last 6 years helping hundreds of business founders get the clarity and the alignment that they need to be more meaningful and relevant to those they serve and to create meaningful growth, irrespective of competition, irrespective of the economy. So about 8 weeks ago, we started getting calls from clients all over the country asking for guidance, asking for direction, asking for help with decision-making in the face of the opportunities and challenges of these times. So we decided to take our regular office hour conversations live and have a dialogue with you so that we can all learn from each other and from what we're seeing out there. So how this will work is we're going to share our insights. We're going to share things that we've seen. You can also at any time let us know what you're hearing, what you're feeling, the questions that you have about your business or about the marketplace by making comments here in our chat box on the right. And also you can send us a note at any time at purpose@storyforge.com. So send us those emails at purpose@storyforge.com. I'm sorry, .co, sorry. Purpose@storyforge.co, or make a comment here in the box, and we'll either answer your questions live, or if you'd like to get on a private call with us, you can go to storyforge.co and sign up for a call to speak with either of us if you don't want to do it live. So today we're going to talk about a couple of things that we're noticing out there in the world. And Barry, you've been following very closely, and we talked about on Wednesday, Airbnb, and how that very large business that's been significantly impacted in the last 6 weeks have been dealing with this crisis. And you have an update for us. So tell us what you're seeing out there.
So we celebrated Airbnb for their communication ability and their message that was shared in very tough times when they laid off 1,500 of their employees due to obviously the downturn in travel and in hospitality business around the world currently. And how the CEO, the co-founder, Brian Chesky, position that he finds himself in, and obviously the employees find themselves in, has been making the news for its empathy and its authenticity and its heart. And we talked about in our last live stream how it was shared, this message was shared through the filter and in the context of their own purpose of helping people to belong. And that set the stage for how they made decisions. Many messages of congratulations came out after that, and commiserations and obviously heartfelt thoughts sent to the employees who lost their jobs, but it was shared as a kind of a case study on how to communicate in tough times. That was, let me see, that was maybe 3 or 4 days ago. In the last day or two now on LinkedIn, actually, I just looked on my LinkedIn and I saw 2 different mentions from different executives from the senior leadership team of Airbnb who are sharing a public directory with a list of all of the employees of that have been let go, obviously with their permission, all of the employees, their contact details, so that others who might want to take advantage of the skills and the experience that these folks had at Airbnb can reach out directly if there are job opportunities available to them. So this is a great example of Airbnb living up to their purpose and trying to make decisions as best they can with the resources that they have available to help their employees even when they're no longer employees. And one of the comments in one of these posts, one of the posts was shared by their chief privacy officer. I'd never heard of the title chief privacy officer, but they have a chief privacy officer who was sharing the details of all their employees, obviously with permission. And one of the comments said that Airbnb will be remembered long after this has passed for the care that they took for the care that they showed to the employees in times of crisis. And I think that is such a great example of how, and a reminder of how the world is watching, and our communities and our customers and our clients and our employees are watching. And we will be remembered for how we have behaved and acted and the decisions we've made in these tough times. So I wanted to showcase Airbnb again today because they had gone to the trouble 4 or 5 years ago of putting in place a framework for thinking about who they are, where they're going, why they exist, so that they could make better decisions. They're now using that, they're applying it, even in tough times of laying off people, they're using it to try and make that as manageable and as empathetic as they possibly can. So kudos to Airbnb.
Yeah, something also interesting in that for me, and this is something we've seen with a lot of our clients over the last 6 weeks, it's recognizing, yesterday we were on with a client, we talked about it as the top of the pyramid. So a new leader that joined that business said, this framework for thinking that you've built for us, where is the detail underneath it? And that's really where your plans that react to the day, to the week, to the month come. But that framework of thinking, those 5 key decision drivers that never change, sit at the top of that pyramid. And everything else that you build out is changeable, right? It's changeable based on market, it's changeable based on customer needs, evolution of technology. But having that framework in place allows you, I think, to be far more creative and more agile with your creativity and innovation. I think it's also a great example of a very large company first thinking like a small company. So if you had a business and you had 15 people in that business and you had to lay 13 of them off, and these were people that you worked with for years, they were your friends, maybe they were your family members, what would you do? Well, obviously you do everything possible to help them land another job. And it's very often, I think, that in very large companies, it's easy for us to say, well, that's just not possible. We have 20,000 employees, we have 100,000 employees. We just can't operate the way a small family business can. And I think this is proving once again something that we've seen over and over, which is it is entirely possible. In fact, it's sometimes even more possible as a large company to live those kind of values and to lean into your beliefs and your purpose and your vision and those things that don't change about your business when you're really big. It's groundbreaking perhaps for a business of their size to do it, but I think we'll see more people follow suit.
I'd imagine there are more. The leaders of Airbnb, the co-founders, are feeling pressures like they've never felt before. They were hoping to take the company public this year. They were on a growth streak. They were expanding around the world in different ways. And then suddenly this hit. And they have pressures coming at them like all business owners do from all sides. They have potentially the public markets looking at them. They've got their own investors. They've got their employees. They've got their Airbnb hosts, etc. And yet they found a way to step back and think about, when they came to this fork in the road, this decision, this opportunity to decide which way to go when it came to their employees, they took the time to think about how best to manage that, not just for the bottom line, but for their stakeholders, their employees. What would they need? Yeah. So they're really using 2 of what we would call the 5 drivers of decision making there. One is, well, what do our stakeholders need right now? What do our people need? In this case, what do our employees need? And they thought about what they needed. They had questions about whether their stock would vest if they left the company, if they were let go. They had questions about what severance they might get. They had questions about when they would have access to the building revoked. They had so many questions that were all answered in this email. But they also thought about something else. They thought about another driver of decision making, which was their purpose. And their purpose, which is why we're doing what we're doing. And their purpose evolved over time to become belonging and helping people to belong. And that was one of these 2 things became essential to making this decision that ultimately led to, I believe, the best possible outcome considering the situation. So every leader is faced with decisions, maybe not always about whether 1,500 people stay or go, but equally impactful decisions or of equal weight to our own businesses. We're faced with these decisions. And if we don't have a filter for thinking about how do we decide about them, we might decide just about business survival. We might decide just about the bottom line. We might decide just about this week's numbers or next week's numbers. But this big decision was made with other filters in mind, which I think is a great case study for how businesses of all sizes can think about how to make even the smallest of decisions, isn't it?
Yeah. Right now, I think there are a lot of us in the business world, a lot of leaders who are wondering, how do I make decisions? So the ways I've made decisions in the past are no longer relevant. I can't look at trends. I can't look at data. I can't really think about what worked before, what worked last year, 5 years ago. And that can feel pretty disorienting. That can feel overwhelming, like you're unmoored. You don't know what you're tethered to. And having this framework for thinking, having a framework for thinking that can help you align all those actions with something you can have confidence in, I think can take away a lot of that kind of pain and anxiety that the uncertainty we're living in right now can create.
So they're an example of a company that has taken control of their message and has owned perception externally, in the sense that they have lived up to their purpose. And by doing so, by acting according to their purpose and by taking care of the needs of those that they serve, in this case, their employees, the message externally is the same message externally as they want it to be internally. One of care, one of empathy, one of kudos, congratulations. In very tough times, you did the best you could. And that's the best they could hope for. Let's contrast that with another company that is of almost of equal size, which is Rent the Runway, which is a subscription service where and is for women only, to rent on a subscription basis, get access to clothing, high-end clothing that you wouldn't want to spend $5,000 on a dress, but for $100 or $200 a month, you get the dress delivered for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks at a time. A very popular service, and I believe one of the largest dry cleaners in the world because of so many people using their service. But the story that has emerged about them externally this week is not one that I think they would want to see reflected or one told about them. And that is that a number of employees reported to authorities and reported to newspapers that they didn't feel safe at work because they felt that the safeguards weren't in place, and they didn't feel that it was an essential service, and they didn't know why Rent the Runway was still in place, even though they needed to get money to pay their bills. They felt that they were being put in a terrible position. And so the story that has emerged is that this, on the surface, non-essential business is operating as if they're an essential business, and they're putting their employees at risk by doing so. And it's created this backlash publicly. And one of the narratives that has emerged is that Rent the Runway is staying open, putting the lives of their employees at risk so that people can take selfies in the mirror wearing ball gowns during coronavirus. It is, I'm sure, a far more complex situation than that, but what a contrasting story that's being told publicly about an organization compared to Airbnb.
Yeah, and it's an interesting question. Typically, people deal with these things after the fact. So there is a narrative that is now out there on social media about Rent the Runway, and I'm sure that they're hiring a PR or a crisis team to deal with it. Far more difficult to deal with a crisis after it has become a crisis. Far easier to think about things in advance, to use decision-making filter of beliefs and values. And as you said earlier, Barry, I think it's really important, this reassessment of what your stakeholders' needs are. So if you've been thoughtful and you've created a framework in the past, and you've identified your stakeholders, what do they need? What do they believe? What do they want? What value do you create for them? We all have to, at this time, go back and reassess that to make sure that we're not tone deaf in our marketing and our messaging, but also not tone deaf in our decisions, to make sure that the decisions that we're making in the moment not just reflect what we thought we knew about our stakeholders and what their needs were, but what their needs are today, and what their beliefs are today, and where their mindset is today. Because the old information about our stakeholders could prove to be pretty damaging. I think this is a great example of that.
It is. And I think that the eyes of the world are on companies like never before now, because we're seeing in times of crisis, people looking for hope, looking for examples of those that are doing great things, but also very quick and even quicker, and maybe justifiably quicker, to vilify and crucify those companies that are deemed to not be living according to the values that people have. And never has it been more obvious that a company, a business, is being evaluated like a best friend. Do we want to hang out with them anymore, or do we not? And how a business behaves will determine who sticks around afterwards and what friends want to hang out with them.
Absolutely. And it's not just customers. I think that's another important thing to note is in these situations, and when we sit down, we work with our clients and create that stakeholder map. It's not just employees, investors, and customers. They're also your vendors, your partners, your landlords, all of the people that have a stake in your business and that your business has a stake in. There's a mutual value that has to be a reciprocity, a mutuality that exists between stakeholders. And where I'm beginning to see some businesses really stumble is when they forgot the mutuality that existed in those relationships. So, we've been very fortunate to work with a lot of real estate developers in our last, 6-7 years of business. And I'm hearing from some of them really amazing stories of landlords and tenants having conversations about rent, working out something that is beneficial to both parties, understanding that they both are stakeholders in each other's businesses and have to find those win-win situations. And I'm also learning of some really slightly disappointing stories of very large businesses taking very large loans from the government and then just not paying their rent. Just deciding that this is the time when they don't have to pay their rent and they're going to go months and months without paying their rent. And, we always like to think of the big bad real estate agents, don't we? Or the big bad real estate holders and developers, but those are businesses too that are employing people. And so I think it's the time for us to get even closer to our stakeholders and to their needs and use that knowledge and that intimacy to make decisions that benefit everyone.
If we're not sitting down and evaluating what our stakeholders need as the first driver of our decision making, there's a very good chance that we'll make a decision that's more based on our needs immediately and not those that we're serving. And so I think when we talk about these 5 drivers of decision making, and we cover them in this live stream every Wednesday and Friday, different elements here are different drivers. Mm-hmm. The first really is, what is it that our people need right now? And we've seen great examples of businesses that have pivoted their services because of a realization that their people, their customers or their employees needed a different thing now. So if the first thought was, how do we stay in business? How do we make money? We'll often make decisions that aren't meeting the needs of those that we serve. Rent the Runway is a great example of that. It would seem like the first decision is, well, how do we make sure we keep paying our bills, or how do we make sure we keep generating revenue? Whereas if the analysis was, or the evaluation was more, well, what's going to be most important now to our people? And if you think about Rent the Runway having warehouses in New Jersey and New York, the most coronavirus hit dense populations in the country, would we consider that our minimum wage, in some case employees taking public transport to our warehouses, might be negatively impacted by our desire to stay open? Does that mean that we run the risk of turning over, we run the risk of losing the business to save our customers, or save our employees? It's a very tough decision, but if we're not at least putting the needs of those that we serve front and center, I don't think we can make the best decisions for the long-term viability of the business. Or how do we want to be remembered in the long term? We acted in these tough times.
The other thing that this brings up for me is how we determine what those stakeholder needs are. So something that you and I have talked about quite often and just gets our hands hot under the collar is when we hear of businesses or leaders maybe understanding that they need a framework, understanding that they need to consider their stakeholders, and doing it by taking their senior most leaders and locking those people in a boardroom until they figure out a story about what these 5 decision drivers are. And they all work hard, and lots of pieces of paper and pens come out, and they come up with a framework, and they pat themselves on the back, and then they go out into the business and begin using it. And often that framework falls apart because they haven't actually listened to or engaged with those stakeholders to hear from them in their own words. What is important? What are my needs? What are my beliefs? Yeah. So it's the great, incredibly complicated and sophisticated tool that we use often with our clients, which is to ask.
Right.
To actually ask and to listen and to be open to hearing what they have to say.
There are things that as a business we will know about our customers, or we will know about our population that we're trying to serve, that can maybe at an initial stage help us make decisions. Like, for example, we have a real estate client that has low-income housing. They knew as soon as this hit, without even having to talk to their customers, they knew that the people living in these low-income properties would immediately be under immense pressure and strain, because there's a good chance that they would not have their jobs. They would lose their jobs, and therefore they would be at risk of not being able to pay their rent. So immediately they knew that they were going to have to put in place contingency measures to help their people. So they were able to do that immediately without even needing to go to talk to their customers and talk to their people. Now, there's no substitute for it, but there's things off where it never fails to surprise me how there are just things we just should know about those we serve, that at the very beginning we should be thinking about, that many businesses overlook. Another great example of a business that just knows that there's a new need before she ever had to talk to customers was Aunt Flo, who runs a business creating menstrual products for women. And she knew as soon as this crisis hit that women and people generally needed the skills she had in producing something different, which was producing face masks, because there was a need for personal protective equipment. She knew that about the need that was out there. So there's this need that we should be tuned in enough to those that we serve or the population that we're addressing, that we're able to, at least at the very beginning, propose or suggest a solution that can then be further enhanced by conversation, by engagement, by having dialogue with those that we're connecting with. But oftentimes we encounter businesses that are not doing either of those things, don't we?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to that excuse of scale. We hear that a lot. So we're too big to know all of our customers. Maybe when we started, when we were a group of 20 or 30 people, maybe then I could have had that level of customer intimacy or employee intimacy where I knew them and I can predict what they needed. But we get so big, there's just no possible way. And what I would say is that as we get larger, as your company grows, putting in those structures, putting in those habits, in place with your leadership teams and with your businesses can keep that kind of intimacy alive and allow your leaders to have that one-on-one contact and communication, two-way communication with employees, two-way communication with customers.
The notion that a business is too big to connect with its customers, of course, is, to your point, a failed argument. One of the largest companies in the world, Apple, famously Steve Jobs, wouldn't talk to his customers because he said that they're not going to know what it is that they want. Like, if it's a bit like Henry Ford saying, if I talk to my customers, they'd say they want a faster horse. But what he was, there are some visionary leaders that are a few steps ahead, because what they're thinking about are universal truths and biological imperatives, like the need for connection, the need for communication, the need for safety, the need for warmth and family and food. And I would argue that visionary leaders are already thinking about those things. So there are things that you may be able to make decisions about based on universal truths and the universal needs people have. Yes. And those things will never change. And how can we, using our skills and using our resources, maybe address some of those things as well?
Yeah, and it's also interesting. It's also the questions you ask, isn't it? I know we've each of us worked with leaders before when they hear some of the questions that we ask when we're talking with their stakeholders and their employees, their clients and partners. They're often quizzical about those questions. It doesn't seem to be a direct question. And it's often in those conversations and those tangents where we really find nuggets of gold, those things that are relevant and meaningful to those stakeholders that the business might not have understood in the beginning. That process of discovery, of discovering these truths, of discovering this DNA, this foundational DNA of the business that can inform the creation of these 5 decision drivers. It's such a fascinating process to me. And once I feel like, and you will have to agree or disagree with me, Barry, but I feel like once we have a leader go through that process, they get it, they have an insight about it, and they want it everywhere. So I had a phone call last night from a leader here in Columbus, Ohio, in one of the businesses that we'd worked with in a nonprofit organization, who called us and said, hey, we have this new foundation that we're setting up and we desperately need that discovery. We need you to go out and discover these essential things that stakeholders need so that we can build this correctly, so we can build it right from the beginning. So she's had that insight about what that intentional methodical work to understand stakeholders, to understand opportunity can actually mean to the creation of a framework that will help make decisions, to the creation of a framework that can become a filter for thinking of the board and the leaders of this new organization. So once you see it, it's really hard to unsee it, those kind of insights, isn't it?
Right. It really is. It really is. Yeah. But we can't have those insights, like you said, get those insights in a vacuum. We can't get them locked away in a boardroom if we're not adding new insights into the mix, especially considering the fact that the world has changed. But if we still make decisions the same way, then something's going to change without us. And we don't want that to happen. So we are here every Wednesday and Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, for businesses who would like to have a conversation, have questions about how to best handle decision-making, messaging in light of the world that we find ourselves in today. We are going to share examples of businesses that we observe in the world doing good things and bad things, and how to emulate those that are doing great things, and how to perhaps learn from those that are perhaps not living up to the standards that their employees or customers expect. And I hope that we can all learn from each of those examples as we share them. So we're here every Wednesday and Friday. Thanks everyone as usual for joining. We will be back again next Wednesday, and I'm sure we'll hear plenty more stories between now and then of businesses that are doing great things to help people in the times of need, and in doing so create a longer term viability and legacy for their own business. Hayley, anything to add before we leave?
No, I just say thanks for joining us. And if you have questions, if you want to hop on a call with me or hop on a call with Barry or both of us over the next week to talk about something that you heard, to address a challenge or an opportunity that you have in your business that you're not quite sure how to deal with, we're here. We're happy to get on a phone and chat with you and provide whatever counsel and help we can. So thanks again for joining.
Stay safe and wash your hands.